Welcome to the debate. Think about the device you are listening to this on right now, or, the software you use to do your job today.
Mm-hmm.
The modern economy is an absolute marvel of optimization. We have built an economic engine that runs at peak performance, breaking output records like year after year.
Oh, absolutely.
But, well, what happens when you look under the hood and realize the fuel lines are somehow starving the very components doing all the heavy lifting? Suddenly, the clean diagnostics of the free market don't quite explain reality anymore.
Right. And that becomes the absolute definition of an ethical gray area. Because the machine is working, clearly, but the real question is who it is actually working for and what rules should govern its operation.
Precisely. So today, we are exploring a central question. How should employers fulfill their ethical obligations to employees in modern capitalism? And this discussion emerges directly from comprehensive business ethics source material detailing the fundamental duties owed to workers.
Yeah, specifically the mandate to provide safe working conditions, fair compensation, a sense of dignity, and workplace privacy.
Exactly. I will be arguing that the current U.S. corporate structure represents a profound ethical failure, mostly characterized by massive wage gaps. Because the market has failed to self-correct, I believe strong, systemic structural interventions, like widespread unionization and European-style co-determination, are ethically required to protect workers.
And I will be arguing that these ethical obligations are overwhelmingly best met through market-driven flexibility, individualized internal policies, and, targeted legal frameworks. Relying on rigid mandatory unionization introduces adversarial inefficiencies that ultimately harm both the enterprise and the very high-performing workers it claims to protect.
Well, let's just lay out our core positions right away. From my perspective, we have to look at the raw mechanics of compensation. An employer's ethical duty to provide fair pay is completely failing under our current structural model.
You think it's completely failing?
Totally. We cannot simply rely on the benevolence of executives to do the right thing, because the data paints a very clear picture of systemic exploitation. I mean, if you look at the period from 1973 to 2016, productivity in the United States increased by 74%.
The output per hour worked skyrocketed. Yes.
Exactly. Workers became vastly more efficient, technology scaled their output, and they produced profoundly more value for their companies. Yet, over that exact same period, wages for U.S. workers increased by only 12%.
Mm-hmm.
The value generated by that 74% increase in productivity didn't just vanish into thin air. It was systematically funneled to the top. I mean, the average CEO is now paid 300 times as much as the average worker in the exact same company.
Right. Okay, but ethical management does not require upending the entire corporate structure or, mandating collective bargaining. In fact, upending the system brings its own severe ethical and operational downsides.
How so?
Well, employers are successfully navigating their ethical duties through adherence to robust legal frameworks that precisely target specific issues without breaking the efficiency of the market. For physical safety, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, aggressively mandates a workplace free of serious hazards.
Sure.
And for equality, we have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Civil Rights Act to ensure workplaces remain free of harassment. These targeted laws actually work.
But they only prevent the most extreme abuses, right? They don't ensure equitable distribution of value.
They set the ethical baseline. Above that baseline, modern workers have highly individualized needs that rigid, one-size-fits-all union contracts simply cannot accommodate. I mean, look at the source data on benefit preferences across demographics.
Okay.
It shows that 61% of women prioritize better health, dental, and vision insurance as a trade-off to earnings, compared to just 47% of men. Similarly, 55% of women prefer work-from-home options versus only 40% of men.
Why? There's variation.
Huge variation. If you force everyone into a rigid collective bargaining agreement, you erase the ability of management to negotiate flexible, individualized arrangements. At-will arrangements, governed by targeted legal frameworks, are the most ethical way to respect a diverse workforce.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how those internal policies are actually functioning on the ground, especially regarding compensation. The source material establishes that a satisfied workforce directly correlates to tangible business benefits.
Well, of course.
The mechanics are simple. Happy employees are more productive, they demonstrate more leadership, and they treat customers better. A satisfied workforce also means fewer on-the-job accidents and less stress. So the workers are delivering on their end of the bargain.
And they are being compensated for it at mutually agreed upon market rates.
But the financial rewards commensurate with their actual output are deliberately withheld. Look at the stagnation of the lower and middle classes following the Great Recession. The Pew Research Center defines middle-class adults as those in households with disposable incomes of around $60,000. While middle-class net worth stagnated entirely through 2016, upper-income household net worth soared to over $800,000. And if we look at the most vulnerable workers, the purchasing power of the minimum wage has been utterly flat since 1940.
Wait, completely flat?
Yes, the actual dollar amount has crept up, sure, but the real minimum wage, which adjusts for inflation and actual buying power, shows zero growth. We have an engine that is producing unprecedented wealth, but the mechanism for distributing that wealth is ethically broken.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that uniform federal mandates are kind of a blunt instrument that fail to account for complex market realities?
Blunt, maybe, but necessary.
You point to the federal minimum wage of $7.25, but the market is already self-correcting at the state and local levels where the cost of living actually demands it.
Is it self-correcting, or just playing catch-up in a few localized bubbles?
The data shows state-level market adjustments are working vigorously. I mean, we see Washington State at $11.50, California and Massachusetts at $11, and cities like Seattle and San Francisco setting minimums at $15. That is the market responding efficiently.
Right, but
a sweeping, rigid federal mandate would bankrupt small businesses in lower-cost areas. And regarding that wealth gap in internal pay structures, unequal pay is often scrutinized through a very narrow lens.
A narrow lens?
Yeah. Internal policies and compensation consultants use careful judgment to structure pay. They pull market data, they analyze a matrix of skills and revenue generation capabilities. A slight change in a job title usually reflects a tangible difference in risk, liability, or daily responsibility. The market inherently rewards specific value.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores the structural reality of the corporation. Think of the corporation like a water pressure system.
Okay.
The workers at the bottom are generating 74% more pressure, more output than they used to, but the valves at the top are completely controlled by the executives, so the water only flows upwards into their reservoirs.
That's a bit reductive, don't you think?
A patchwork of localized wage hikes doesn't fix the plumbing, and leaning on slightly different job titles to justify pay discrepancies is exactly the ethical loophole the source material warns us about.
It's not a loophole if the duties are genuinely different.
But often they aren't. Look at the persistent gender pay gap. The text explicitly points out that a woman with the exact same education, the exact same experience, and the exact same skills, doing the same job as a man, is still likely to earn less at all levels.
Well, there are other factors.
When an employer changes a job title slightly just to avoid the legal requirement of pay equivalency, that is a profound ethical failure. This proves that we cannot rely on the free market to self-correct internal wage policies.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are assuming that because there are imperfections in market-driven compensation, the only ethical solution is organized labor.
It's the most effective one we have.
But organized labor brings a host of its own ethical and operational problems that fundamentally damage the very mechanics of the workplace.
If the employee can't negotiate their wage without risking their livelihood, the market isn't free. That power imbalance is exactly why structural leverage is required. Just look at the international data. We should be looking at the European model.
The European model is a completely different culture.
Sweden has an 82% unionization rate. Meanwhile, the United States is sitting at an abysmal 12% overall. Our private sector is at a mere 6.5%, and the public sector is at a mere 0.5%, according to the source data.
Because the U.S. workforce values individualism and meritocracy over forced collectivism.
Or because U.S. workers have been systematically stripped of structural leverage. The text highlights a concept popular in Europe called co-determination. This isn't just about strikes. It gives workers the explicit right to participate on the board of directors of their company.
Right.
A board comprised only of executives asks, How many people can we fire?
That's pretty cynical.
A board with worker representation asks, how do we retrain our people to use this new technology? This model explicitly leads to higher productivity, fewer strikes, better pay, and safer working conditions. It forces ethical management because the workers have a structural veto over unethical exploitation.
I come at it from a different way because that European model of co-determination and heavy unionization ignores the very real, documented cons of unions that fundamentally restrict worker freedom here in the U.S.
Restrict freedom?
Yes. The source material outlines this clearly. First, unions force workers to pay dues and fees that they might rather not pay. Ethically, how can we mandate that a worker surrender a portion of their paycheck to an organization they may fundamentally disagree with?
They pay for the representation that secures them higher wages. It's a net positive.
But it removes their choice. Second, unions consistently lead to a closed culture. This insular environment actually makes it harder to diversify the workforce, contradicting the very goals of the EEOC you championed earlier.
I wouldn't say it contradicts it.
But most importantly, from a mechanism perspective, consider how collective bargaining agreements actually structure pay. They create rigid seniority systems. Pay increases are often dictated by years served rather than value created.
Right, for fairness.
But it makes it incredibly difficult to fast-track promotions for a young, high-performing worker, or, frankly, to terminate a low-performing worker who has simply been there a long time. You are structurally punishing your best employees to protect your worst, and the workers themselves recognize this limitation.
Are they recognizing a limitation or are they responding to legislative pressure?
They are voting with their feet. The data shows that 28 states have now adopted right-to-work laws. These are laws that explicitly state a worker cannot be forced to join a union as a condition of employment. And this isn't just in historically anti-union regions. This includes former manufacturing strongholds where unions were once powerful, like Michigan and Indiana. The proliferation of right-to-work states proves that modern workers want freedom from the coercive nature of closed shops.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Is right to work truly about worker freedom, or is it simply a legislative tool designed to maintain an incredibly unbalanced power dynamic?
It's about letting the worker choose.
Right-to-work laws systematically starve unions of funding, stripping workers of their only collective leverage. What you call freedom from closed shops actually just traps workers in the doctrine of employment at will.
Employment at will is a symmetrical doctrine. It affirms that either the employee or the employer may dissolve the arrangement at any time. If you don't like the working conditions, you have the absolute freedom to leave.
Symmetrical on paper, maybe. But let's look at the actual mechanism of that power dynamic. The text notes that employment at will covers approximately 85% of employees in the private sector.
Right.
When a corporation with billions in revenue terminates an at-will employee, the corporation barely feels a ripple. They hire someone else the next day. But when that employee is terminated, they lose their livelihood, their health care, and their ability to feed their family.
I understand the stakes are high for the individual.
The friction of separation is entirely asymmetrical. That massive power imbalance makes the worker inherently vulnerable. Even basic protections like the WARN Act, which is supposed to mandate 60 days advance notice for mass layoffs, completely fail.
They don't completely fail.
The data shows only 20% of displaced workers actually received written advance notice, and a mere 7% had 2 months' notice.
But the existence of bad actors doesn't negate the efficiency of the at-will system.
It's not just about layoffs, though, because 85% of the private workforce is at will and inherently replaceable. Employers exert an immense amount of control over the daily bodily and mental autonomy of their workers.
That sounds a bit dramatic.
The threat of termination forces compliance. This bleeds directly into workplace privacy and monitoring.
And I will defend that monitoring as a completely necessary and ethical business practice. You spent your opening statement praising the 74% increase in American productivity.
I did.
Well, how do you think that productivity is achieved and maintained? It requires oversights. Monitored workstations, cameras, and electronic devices permit employers to oversee at-work behavior, ensuring the company's time and resources are being used appropriately.
But at what psychological cost to the human being doing the work?
There are ethical and legal guardrails in place to protect the worker. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986, the ECPA, it establishes clear boundaries.
Clear boundaries?
Yes, it includes the business purpose exception, which permits employers to monitor oral and electronic communications, provided they can show a legitimate business purpose. It also includes the consent exception, allowing monitoring if employees have given their consent.
Oh, sure. Consent under threat of losing your job.
Tracking keystrokes, monitoring internet use, analyzing idle time. These are entirely fair practices, provided the employer develops a clear, specific, and reasonable monitoring policy that is proactively communicated. The same applies to drug testing. It is completely ethical within an at-will environment as long as the procedure is fair, accurate, and designed to minimize errors like false positives.
But you were talking about treating a human being like a piece of machinery. Think about the listener right now who has Slack or Microsoft Teams open on their computer. Under the ECPA's business purpose exception, your employer can legally track the exact seconds that little green dot goes gray. They can track your keystrokes per hour. That isn't just accountability. It fundamentally alters the psychological reality of your day.
It ensures productivity.
The text explicitly notes that the laws governing electronic monitoring under the ECPA are somewhat indirect and inconsistent. It provides incredibly weak protection against extreme electronic surveillance.
But if a company is paying for your time, they have a right to know how that time is being spent.
Extreme surveillance violates the core ethical duty clearly stated in the text, treating employees with a sense of dignity and respecting a minimum of their privacy. We noted earlier that a satisfied workforce leads to less stress and fewer accidents.
Right.
But subjecting a worker to panopticon-level surveillance, where they know an algorithm is constantly measuring their idle seconds, creates the exact psychological stress and burnout that ethical management is explicitly supposed to prevent. It destroys the dignity of the workplace.
Okay, dignity in the workplace does not mean an absence of accountability. A clear, specific monitoring policy that is fully communicated to the employee respects their dignity by providing transparent expectations.
Transparent expectations to act like a robot.
No, if an employee chooses to use company time to download unauthorized software, leak proprietary information, or simply idle away hours they are being paid for, the employer has a legitimate business right to know, just as they have a right to maintain a safe environment through accurate drug testing. Ethical obligations flow both ways.
Both ways, sure.
The employer owes fair pay and safety. The employee owes their time and focus.
Accountability is one thing, measuring human output in milliseconds is another. When we look at the totality of the evidence, I have to summarize my position by returning to that central, glaring statistic.
The productivity gap.
Yes. The mechanisms of the free market have clearly decoupled effort from reward. A 74% increase in productivity against the mere 12% increase in wages is an undeniable systemic ethical failure. The wealth is being created by the workers, who are increasingly monitored and stressed out, but it is being hoarded by the executives.
Well,
True workplace ethics requires systemic balance. The data proves we cannot simply rely on the benevolence of at-will employers or the subjective judgment of outside compensation consultants who inevitably favor the company paying their invoices. We need structural power shifts, like co-determination and strict, legally binding privacy protections, to ensure that the people powering the engine of capitalism actually share in its rewards.
and I will summarize by reiterating that ethical obligations are overwhelmingly best fulfilled by offering flexible, individualized benefits and maintaining meritocratic environments where high performers can truly thrive. Workers are not a monolith. The fact that men and women prioritize dramatically different benefits proves that flexible, individualized arrangements are necessary for ethical treatment. Relying on adversarial collective bargaining, closed union cultures, and rigid seniority structures ultimately harms the diversity, efficiency, and adaptability of the modern workplace.
I hear you.
We have strong, targeted legal frameworks like OSHA and the EEOC to handle genuine abuses. Beyond that, the free market driven by mutual consent, transparent policies, and the freedom to walk away remains the most effective tool for ethical management.
It is a profound structural challenge, One thing we certainly both agree on is the sheer capability of the workforce. The data shows the United States ranks in the top 5 or 6 countries globally for productivity, and actually number 2 on the list compiled by the OECD.
Absolutely. The output of the American worker is undeniable. The source material very clearly defines the duties employers owe: safety, fair wages, dignity, and privacy. But the tension over the absolute best mechanism to deliver those duties is something that is going to continue to evolve as the workplace itself changes.
Which means this conversation is far from over. We highly suggest exploring the source material further to form your own conclusions on the balance of power in the workplace. Because when you look at that high-performance engine of modern capitalism, the ultimate question remains: who actually controls the pressure valves, and who is treated like a replaceable part?